All right, hello and welcome everybody to the April 3rd meeting of the Amherst Planning Board. The first item on our agenda tonight is to review and approve the minutes of March 20th, which were in our packets. Did anybody have any changes to these minutes? Yes, Mr. O'Keefe.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you, everyone. All right. We have, the next item is our zoning subcommittee report. Mr. Crowner.
As you know, we're just about wrapping up the list of articles that we have for the spring. There's two that we have not yet had a hearing on: the fraternity residence dimensional table and the non-conforming structures for form-based design requirements. Those public hearings will be next planning board in 2 weeks, and the zoning subcommittee will have a recommendation for you at that time. You have current language. We didn't make any substantive changes to the language that you have tonight. Just made some cosmetic changes to language and so on. There are some changes to articles that we have already recommended, namely the mixed-use center dimensional table. We originally, we had proposed in a couple of districts to recommend going to 3.5 floors in some of them. We have since been advised that the building commissioner is uncomfortable enforcing something that does not have a definition either in our zoning bylaw or even in the building code as to what a floor is, or at least not something that is a half floor. Sorry, a half floor. So when we brought this forward, we did have some language that referred to floors and half floors in the form-based design regulations that we have now decided to put off until the fall. Rather than create something that is unclear and potentially difficult to enforce, we're now recommending that we delete the half on those districts where we are proposing to change to a half. Now, there already exists a half floor in some of the residential districts and the office park district. In the dimensional table right now, we're not proposing to change that now. We can't. That's not part of any article. We hope or intend to come back in the fall or at some point in the future, either with a definition of floors and half floors, or possibly a recommendation to do away with the half there too. So we'd like to make that change to article that you've already voted. Also on that article, language in section 16.9 that would describe how a roof is measured. It was pointed out that there are, on some buildings, there are different roofs. I mean, there's not just necessarily just one roof. So we need to know which roof we're talking about. And so I think you have language that shows a highlighted in yellow addition of the phrase "of the main body of the roof." Again, that's not really a change to our intention all along. It's just making it clear what we want to be measured. So I want you to be aware of that, and I guess affirm your recommendation to town meeting. And I don't think we have more of a report than that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Croner. Anything from any other members? Okay, let's go ahead and have a public comment period. If you'd like to come forward, please just raise your hand and come to the microphone and identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Melissa Rubenstein, Precinct 10 County Meeting member, and as I explained to the zoning subcommittee, I've been out of town for several months, so when I came back at the end of March, I just kind of got my first look at some of the material that Mr. Tucker sent out on what was going to be discussed tonight. So that's kind of the context of my remarks. In looking over the zoning proposals that are likely to come before spring town meeting, I find myself in a real quandary because as a resident living near the center of town, I've spoken against and voted against several zoning articles in recent years that sought, in my mind, to increase density and potentially destabilize existing family neighborhoods. At that time, many of us advocated for increased density of the downtown commercial center, or BG area district, where design controls already exist and already in place as the not logical next step for increased density. Therefore, I was really pleased when I looked at the packet to see that the BG district was being addressed, and the changes that I saw, I thought were very reasonable, and I felt good. I have a chance to support a zoning article at town meeting, and I really think it will pass. I think most everyone in town would agree these are good changes. That being said, I was distressed to see this plan include an area I still feel is very vulnerable as a residential area, and that's North Amherst. And from my perspective, it's going to make it very difficult for me to vote for this whole package. This package, which is 8 pages long, at least the one I'm concerned about, and very complex, falls down the same path some other zoning bylaws have followed, where there are lots of parts, very complex, and people get confused. And I'm worried that's something I really want to happen. The BG is going to fall because of all of this complication. I'd really like to see that pass. So I was advocating, why is this all being put in one package? What is the advantage? Will it make the warrant easier for town meeting members to understand? Will it simplify the zoning changes in town? Some of this was explained to me that, these commercial and BL districts, the same thing has to be done to them no matter where they are. But I'm still thinking, why do everything now? So I just don't want another round of town meeting to go by without a good outcome for something. So that's why I would encourage the planning board and the zoning subcommittee to get, perhaps strengthen their argument by separating the BG out, not waiting for it to happen on the floor of town meeting by someone who isn't part of the planning board, and have it be voted independently. And whatever happens with the other, let that happen. I mean, I might be wrong, it might pass, but at least give the BG a chance to be changed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rubenstein. Response from,
Yeah, I responded at the zoning subcommittee, but so as you know, the article that she's referring to, the mixed-use center district dimensions, is designed to be divided, and she suggests that perhaps the planning board should be the one that divides it. That makes sense. We could consider that.
Mr. Tucker.
I do think Ms. Rubenstein raised raises an interesting question that the board should consider, and that's the order in which these occur. Right now, as structured, the article, because the bulk of the work that has been occurring has been on trying to change those districts which are not village-like to become more village-like, and that's the limited business district and the commercial district. And so the first sections of this article are the dimensional changes to those two districts which share a dimensional column in Table 3, and then the other associated changes in the footnotes and in the section that addresses height in Article 6. You could as easily reverse the order and start with the general business district and those two sections, the footnotes and the height, go on to the village center business district and take up the BLCOM last in the way in which the article is laid out. That way you could either build momentum or look at it any way you want. But my point is that you can reorganize this in a way that you think makes the most sense, and you might want to think about what that is.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. Mr. Crowner?
Zoning subcommittee didn't discuss this, and it really, if we want to discuss it, it needs to be done now because the language is going to be signed next Monday, so we have to decide.
Obviously, I would like to find some way to make these workable, that works. If there's a way to arrange them better or split them up that would work better, I'm certainly open to suggestions. Certainly you of the zoning subcommittee are more familiar with the details of these than we are.
It's really a strategic thing. It's not. One does just on the face of it. One doesn't have to come before another unless we want to do it strategically somehow. And she's provided a reason why. But you could as easily argue some other way, I assume.
Yes, Ms. Kruger.
No, we didn't discuss this because it came up near the end of our meeting. We have talked about the ABC format, and I think initially whether they would be separate articles or not. And I think one way or another we're going to have a full discussion of these issues. And I'm not opposed to having 3 articles and maybe one report that talks about them together. I don't know if there's an advantage to us dividing in anticipation that somebody will divide from the floor, and that could be more unpredictable or messier, or I think people are going to think about these differently, the A, B, and C, and kind of go either way.
Thank you, Ms. Kruger. Mr. O'Keefe.
Thank you. I guess I would be opposed to the notion of having separate articles for them. If nothing else, we could keep them as one article and make separate motions within the article. I think if we were to divide them up into separate articles, you're taking what's already a lengthy warrant for Springtown meeting as a whole and one that already contains a large number of articles and really needlessly complicating it by introducing extra sets of steps that have to go through. Every time you have a separate article, you have a separate planning board report, separate select board, finance committee, people speak to it. So there's just a lot of logistical hurdles to having separate articles, whereas making separate motions within the same article essentially has the same effect and doesn't create the need to split it into separate articles. That's combined with, in my mind, the sense that there are connections between the various segments of this. These are not independent things, and I think that the reason that we've packaged them this way is because we're looking for a consistent set of zoning across multiple districts in town. So I'm sort of opposed to the idea of doing it piecemeal, but we could certainly decide, and obviously any person on the floor of town meeting could decide to ask that they be considered separately. And I guess if that's what we're anticipating, that would be my preference as opposed to having separate articles.
And
Can I ask a follow-up? Just Mr. O'Keefe, thank you, because I didn't realize we could move the parts separately. But I just wanted to ask you, would you want the order of the parts to stay as they currently are, or do you see a different order?
I guess I'm neutral on that. I haven't really thought through the tactical aspects of what should go first and what should come later, so it's hard for me to say.
On the face of it, it seems to make sense to present them in the order that Mr. Tucker suggested, which is, I believe, the reverse of the order that they're in now. But that's something that do we need to change the language on the warrant in order to do that?
I believe the answer is no. I mean, people will read what's in the warrant and process that mentally in the order that it appears on the paper. So if you're really trying to encourage a certain thought path through the article, then you would want to present it in that way. But technically, we could make the motions in whatever order we wanted to, although that would almost certainly confuse people if you did it in an order that was different than what's printed on the paper.
Mr. Tucker?
I would note that there's a mild complicating factor in that the proposed amendments to the footnotes, one of the amendments applies across the board to footnote N, to all three. The other amendment adds to E, the limited business and commercial districts, and that would only apply to amendments under the limited business commercial district dimensions, which is why it's ordered the way it is now. These are all, if the first pulse of changes pass, then the other two make sense in terms of how they go forward, because there are already changes that await them. Passed. So we might have to end up dividing the footnotes if we reorder them as they stand.
Or else you would end up with a meaningless footnote reference?
Well, you might, yeah. Or you could you could just move it differently in the moment, which would be possible. While we're at it, as a non sequitur, but not a non sequitur, I would draw your attention to A3, to the, and I forgot to ask Stephen to take a look at this earlier, to our new graphic illustrating how height is to be measured, and to see if that meets with everyone's approval.
Those of us who are not on the zone subcommittee generally don't print these things out and make our own copies, so we're pretty much lacking them. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, it's,
This one, right?
there was one right here.
Yeah, I think we did have it on our table.
You did have it on, I had it on my table, thank you. Yep.
So that would add the language of the main body of the roof. That's the yellow language, and then the pictures are different?
Picture is new.
We saw it last time.
Okay.
Saw a different version.
Yep.
They were,
Version, yeah.
Yep.
This is pretty typical.
Okay. Well, I don't hear any great consensus to trying to change around the order of the article itself or make changes to what we've already done. So I propose that we just leave it as is. And if we need to move it differently at town meeting, then so be it. Or if we decide to.
Packet of potential motions ready.
All right, thank you. Let's see, other public comment?
Janet Keller, Precinct 1 Town Meeting Member. I know I talked at length last time about my concerns about North Amherst and how it differs on the ground from these other business districts, the red, how it's in a sea of green and blue. I would like to and beg the indulgence of the zoning subcommittee members who've heard this before, but speak along similar but slightly different lines from Alyssa, in that I too am wanting very much to support the zoning package and find that by having North Amherst knit into it the way it is, and still having concerns that I've expressed, at least as I've been able to see to this point, I have to say, like Alyssa, I'm coming to this a little late in the game, since so much of my energy was being taken up on another town board. So.
And thank you very much for your work on that.
You're welcome. It was a great experience. But this is a very complicated package with a lot of moving parts, and they interact with each other in certain ways. And you need to do some calculations to try to figure out how it all works. And I haven't figured it all out, but I figured it out enough so that I'm concerned, and I haven't been able to get my questions answered, to get my concerns allayed. It still feels to me like this is too big, and it still feels to me like this is too intense. And backing into the package, that means a package that I would like to support, that I want to support. Like Alyssa, I want to see more density in appropriate areas, including the downtown, including perhaps the fraternity areas. And I've mentioned before University Drive, Mass Ave, et cetera. I recognize that some change will come to North Amherst, but I feel there's a vast difference between these areas, and having them woven together in this way puts me in a very awkward position of wanting to support parts of this and feeling I can't support any of it because that would harm the area in which I live, so and harm my neighbors as well. So I just wanted to be clear about that. I've have a statement, and like to have it entered into the record, and appreciate the opportunity to comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Keller. And we do have your statement as well as Ms. Rubenstein's statement that you both submitted, and they are entered into the record.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Let's talk. You brought up the fraternity residence dimensions. Was that discussed at the subcommittee meeting at all?
No, nothing has changed from before. All we're proposing to do is add footnote A to 3 of the dimensions in order to make a enforcement of a permit more flexible, to allow something more than what is currently allowed there, because it's an opportunity potentially for private student housing.
Right. And I had a question on the next one, which is the non-conforming structures form-based design regulations, which I don't know if did you discuss it today at all, or is
Yep.
this just as it was? I'm just curious, and to me the pictures look odd. You have this sort of traditional looking building with a traditional setback, and it's a non-conforming building. And we're saying that where it's set back further from the sidewalk, that the addition has to be built, or from the setback, that the addition needs to be pushed up to the front of the setback area. I mean, I just don't understand how that's an improvement over having it parallel with the building. and for when you already have a building with an existing setback, especially looking at 9.312 on the second page, item 1, where now you've got this existing traditional building and you have two buildings right up against it. And, you know, everything that we talk about in terms of designing neighborhoods is to try and make things consistent. And that, to me, seems very inconsistent. And I guess I would just like to know your thinking about why this is better than what we have now.
So these are form-based design regulations that are attempting to change the streetscape or to create a streetscape that is that has buildings near to public ways, so that you avoid the experience of having parking in front of buildings, and it's asking for, if there's going to be any changes, we want those changes to start to bring the streetscape into the setback range that we want. We don't want to perpetuate setbacks that don't really work or that aren't reflective of the character that we want to have. So we don't want to perpetuate bad. We want to promote something that's different, even if it's, or something that's good, even if it's different. I guess I don't really understand your specific point on, was it number 2 on the second page?
It's the bottom one.
Oh, the bottom one, okay.
That applies, if I may, only in an instance where someone is proposing to build a separate building. There are basically two sections here. One, the first section addresses the different circumstances in which someone might want to put an addition on a building or enlarge an existing building with an attached addition. The second half deals with separate buildings and then where do you locate them. Part of the intent from a form-based standpoint in mixed-use districts, which is where this would apply, is to try and start to create a streetscape, a pedestrian streetscape. And if the building is, as in the case of what the new Watrobas up in North Amherst, set 80 feet back from the road with a double-loaded line of parking in between the sidewalk and the building, there's no opportunity there for a pedestrian downtown village center streetscape. So part of the intent is over time, as these buildings change, to direct where new structure goes such that it comes up to the street and creates that, activates and creates a pedestrian streetscape.
So one situation where this would apply is in the sort of existing strip mall type of situation,
Exactly.
right? So that's, and because these are only applying in the business districts and not residential, then you're not running into a situation where you have a house, you know, an 1840 house that's set back 60 feet from the road and you're forcing them to build an addition that runs right up to the sidewalk.
Right.
It's only for commercial type. And I understand now that it's like the center of town we have here. You don't have parking between the sidewalk and Antonia's Pizza, right? It's pushed right up to the
Mhm.
border, I see.
And
But it does look odd in the pictures.
yeah, no, actually, we did talk about that, and I just want to be clear that the pictures show, in each case, they show the buildings coming right up to the minimum setback, but we actually mean a building can have its front anywhere in that setback. The setback is arranged. There's 2 dotted lines, so it doesn't necessarily have to come all the way up. As long as you put it within the range, that's where we want it to be.
It could be as far back as the second line.
I see. And what if the existing building is set so far back that you would need a 100-foot-long addition to get it up to the setback line?
Then you either build a separate building up on the streetscape that's associated with that property, or you apply for a special permit and try and argue to the special permit granting authority that you ought to be able to do whatever you want it to be.
So, and that brings, actually, I have another question about that. When you're expanding an existing non-conforming structure, don't you need a special permit anyway?
It depends, but usually yes. remember that you've got two sets of amendments addressing nonconforming structures here. The first one that doesn't deal with these specific districts or these kinds of buildings in particular talks about having the body which is issuing the permit for the use issue the special permit for the modification to the nonconforming structure. And that's what we're talking about here. So it's not automatically a ZBA special permit or just a special permit out of the blue. If the other amendment passes, it would be a special permit being issued by the same body that's looking at the use in the new building or the use in the addition. Once again, trying to not have two boards issuing one permit.
Ms. Brestrup?
So I just wanted to clarify something for myself. I think if you had a historic building in one of these districts, then you could choose to go with the option where you would place the additions behind the building or next to the building, and you would apply for a special permit. Is that correct?
That would be grounds for both applying for it and arguing for its passage.
So what would be a situation where you could push one forward, like is done in these, without a special permit?
If what you're doing, one of the reasons the language at the beginning is rather general, and it actually does need a stronger statement of purpose in terms of design here. But one of the reasons it's general is that we don't necessarily know in one instance what nonconformity is. It could be that the lot is too small, it could be that the frontage is too big, we don't know. So you have to be generalized in that way. And depending on what it is will affect what's possible within the range, which is why there's a range of possibilities described here. Get back, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Is there any situation where you can expand the footprint of an existing non-conforming building without getting a special permit?
If the, yes, if, and particularly if the previous amendment that you're bringing before town meeting passes, that will be the case. In some cases, the building commissioner could simply say that's okay, based on the amendments that you proposed. Or the planning board, under site plan review, given the use that's going to be occupying the space, could say that's okay. Or if in the process of expanding the footprint, you're exacerbating or having an effect upon the nonconformity, whatever it is that's determining the nonconforming status of the building, then an additional special permit on top of the site plan review, if that's the permit for the use, in order to modify the nonconformity, would be able to be granted by the.
So I'm sorry, but I'm still just looking for an example. Ms. Brestrup?
I think we talked about this at the zoning subcommittee meeting, and we determined that most of these illustrations shown here would require a special permit because they are non-conforming buildings that are being altered. Potentially the only one that might not require a special permit would be this one where you're building one or two separate buildings on the same property and you're not altering the existing building at all. So my understanding was that the zoning subcommittee agreed that almost all the illustrations here would require a special permit. Most of the time.
Because of the variety of ways in which something can become or be non-conforming, we can't answer the question. We need a range of specific examples.
All right, so one example might be that, I'll just come up with one myself, that the building is 5 stories tall, but has a smaller footprint than is allowed under the zoning bylaw. If you're choosing to expand the footprint of the building with a single-story addition, you wouldn't be increasing the nonconformity, and you could expand that by right, following these rules.
Yes.
Because you wouldn't be increasing the nonconformity of the height,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
Okay.
Or if you had a building that was, for examples, was too close to the setback on one side. You were going to expand the footprint, but the addition was going to start as it went back from the building at the correct setback.
All right, okay. All right, thank you. That's actually really helpful, thank you. That answers my question. Mr. O'Keefe?
I have a question about the diagrams too, a slightly different question. So again, going back to the first diagram, I guess my question is it the intent of the regulations that the building, the addition, exist entirely within the portion, the front setback area delineated by those two marked lines, or is it just the front facade of the building needs to fall within that? Because that's not how I read the words. The words say, any addition in front of an existing building shall be placed within the front setback. When you say the addition shall be placed within the front setback, that sounds to me like the whole thing needs to go inside there. And maybe we could find a way to say the front portion of the building needs to do that. Thank you. And I think that applies to the other scenarios as well.
All right. Follow up on that, or, good, okay. I wondered if, and this is just something that occurred to me when I was looking at these pictures, these green boxes, a lot of times in our existing streetscapes, those areas are where we have street trees, right? And so I'm wondering if that was considered, or
The front setback area, which is the phrase that's used here, describes an area that begins, for instance, in the limited business commercial district as proposed, 10 feet back from the front property line, and then extends 30 feet back. So you have 10 feet in front of that within which to establish public street trees on private property, if that's desired.
so these lines are approximately 10 and 30 feet in the commercial districts?
They happen to be illustrative, but in all cases, they would be set back somewhat they would begin back from the front property line.
All right, I guess I just was curious about that. And in fact, I can now see, if I look closely, I can see some trees, ghostly trees in there. So I guess that answers that question. Ms.
I
Kruger?
think it raises a question, because what if you wanted to add or build other buildings and you were forced to move forward and there were existing specimen trees in that belt, whether they were street trees or not? And what if the result of this design regulation caused a property owner to have to remove major trees?
Mr. Tucker?
One solution would be to create a courtyard in that building within which the specimen tree was the central feature.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. An excellent solution. Mr. Crowner?
Well, that would also be grounds for asking for a special permit to avoid it.
Okay. All right, I guess we're going to bring this up again at our public hearing, but I wanted to just see if there was any changes we wanted to make, and we came up with one, so that's good.
I actually have one more now that you mentioned that.
Yep.
Which is that the point that Mr. Crowner just made about getting relief through a special permit in a case like that, the way that this is written, actually currently that only applies to the second section for new buildings, but that's not listed as an option for this first section where the buildings are connected to the existing building. And to me, those seem like similar enough cases that you might want to be able to provide that relief in both scenarios.
I agree with Mr. O'Keefe that we ought to provide special permit relief under the first sections as well. If there's some way we can squeeze that wording in or modify the existing wording. It seems to me you don't really need a, oh, I see. Either you could add a section 4 under 9.31 Or 9.311, or you could just change that 2 to a 9.313 and make it no picture and allow for special permits. So that last section of this article could be 9.313, any new, the conditions of this section 9.31 can be permitted under special permit, something. Just allow an out through special permit for the whole thing. Does that make sense to do it that way?
A separate last section that did that. Talked about
I think we've done it.
modification or waiver.
Yeah. All right. Okay, excellent. All right, was there any other public comment? Follow up, Ms. Keller, please. Yep.
Janet Keller, Precinct 1. Could you give us a few examples of some non-conforming buildings to which this would conceivably apply, please?
I could, any building that falls beyond the 30-foot proposed maximum setback would become non-conforming. So the building where CB's is, the Shumway block on College Street is probably, well, I don't know if it's 30 feet back or not. Yeah, so
Anything that has a,
It has parking in front of it.
that has parking in,
I think that what you have to remember is that this is not by itself. There are existing nonconformities now under the existing regulations. But we are also proposing a number of changes to dimensional regulations and other things. If those pass, then buildings that do not meet that become nonconforming and then fall under this.
So currently, we don't have any maximum setbacks, and we're proposing a maximum setback now, which would create nonconformities from anything that's too far from the road.
right, so this would it be correct then to say that this would make your example, Latrobe's 80 feet back, now it becomes non-conforming.
Same thing with our little Captain Video Plaza.
right. Yep.
Same thing with the whole of Marketplace Plaza on University and Amity. The parking's all in front.
Yep.
Yes, and the intro, okay, got it. Thanks. And then, could you check my math, please? All right. So I'm looking at everyone's favorite illustration here. That would be the traditional building with the two green boxes added on, one to the rear and one in the front setback area. And so, yeah, on page 1. So I took my little ruler and guess that the roof heights are the same. I'm not sure that that's exactly right, but yeah. And that the one in the front setback was approximately half the size of the existing, is that right? Existing building. I came up with that the footprint for those two green blocks was 75% of the footprint for the white block. Does that sound good? And that it's 2 stories, so it's not just the footprint, but it's 2 times 75%. So it's 150% more space, area, square footage. wrong.
The existing building is also 2 stories, so
But she's saying, what's the total effect on?
Yeah, yeah, how much more, I own this building, right? Okay, and I've got a brilliant idea for some stuff to expand it. How much could I expand it in that example? I was just trying to get a sense of scale here.
What this is not doing, is changing the rules about lot coverage and building coverage.
Okay,
So, I mean, this doesn't override other things. What this does is, within the framework of the other rules, in terms of height, for instance, it isn't a 5-story addition. It's a 2-story addition. This allows expansion within that framework. It does not waive the other rules.
all right. And the other point you made is, these green things aren't 5 stories, and that would not, and that's fine.
Really not meant to be illustrative of anything other than this is where something is going to happen. Not really a plan or a design. It's just a green box represents a thing coming forward from the existing building. That's really all it means.
All right, and that brings me to my final comment, which is around nomenclature. So this article is entitled Form-Based Design Regulations for Non-Conforming Structures. And one of the things around all the discussions we've been having with the form-based is the expectation it sets up, especially if it says form-based design regulations, that somehow it's design in the sense that we often think about that this is a traditional building and anything that's built with it should be in character in some way, or you should have some other good explanation for why that's an appropriate addition. But if I get this right, what it's really doing is talking about where you put stuff when you're adding it, and so I just want to say, you might want to think about what you want to call this. And, I know this form-based stuff is the latest and greatest, but not if it confuses people. So it's just a thought. And, I'm not terribly wed to it. It occurred to me, and I'm sharing it.
Thank you, Ms. Keller, your point is well taken. Yes, Mr. Tucker. Oh, wait, let me get Mr. O'Keefe first.
Mr. Tucker addressed my point.
Okay.
What form-based design means is that it's the design of form. It's not what the brick patterning is along the lintel, along the top of the building. It's not the tint of the mortar between the bricks. It's not the pattern of the windows. It's the form as it lays out on the land. It's really addressing where things go more than anything else. That's really what it's about. It's about the eventual form of development when it ends up being done. What is the form that it takes, and trying to guide it that way, as opposed to the kinds of design regulations which are already in the bylaw that address those more detailed aspects, whether it's under the design review regulations or something else.
So before I get to you.
That's fine.
Okay. I actually kind of agree with Ms. Keller that we might want to make the title more descriptive of what this section is actually about. Currently, form-based design requirements doesn't really tell you what it says. Now, this is this falls under Article 9, which governs non-conforming, which it's grandfathered buildings and uses. And it seems to me if we titled this article something like location of new additions or enlargements to non-conforming structures and leave the form-based name out of it, it makes it a lot less intimidating and more descriptive of what we're trying to do.
Might we use the word site design requirements? because that's really,
Site location requirements.
I was,
You need a mic, Mr. Schreiber.
oh, please.
yes, I don't have a problem with it as it is, but site design, to me, implies the opposite of where everything but the building. So it is, you're right that it is building location standards, but, I mean, the broad field of urban design can be very general, or it can be very specific. So, you know, really, this is kind of a subset of an urban design problem.
I mean, couldn't we just call it location of structures?
I like that.
There you go.
Does that work? Better?
All I was pointing out. This is really not a key issue for me. I was just sharing with you that I read it, and my mind said, when I read that, and I know we've had a lot of discussions around it, and people can be nudgy about it. So all I'm sharing with you is I read it, and that's the thought that I had. And what you do with it, anything that makes it clearer for people, I think, is to the good of all involved.
Thank you. So location of additions and structures or something like that.
Locational requirements for structures or something like that.
Mr. O'Keefe?
Just pointing out what should be obvious, but I'll point it out anyways, that it's not just the title of the article, but there's several instances of the wording within the article in the section head and in the text of it as well. So you would need to make equivalent changes in those places as well.
I also wonder if in section 9, oh, Connie, go ahead.
This is really, I think what we're doing is really helpful, and this is clarifying. But what I had my hand up before, I figured out what I don't like about the diagram, especially the first one. I think we're adding to the confusion because we're showing a traditional building and then we're showing the green blocks as just building massing. I think, to be fair, all the boxes should be just shown as massing. You could have maroon and green or black, gray, I mean, whatever, but I think it sets up more confusion because it just, and in that first one, if you could, if I'm understanding this, that green box could go totally in line with the existing building, and I think it looks more pleasing, and that's still, or maybe it has to be 1 inch. It can go, if it goes right up to that, the minimum or the maximum. We have it all, the diagram shows it all the way up.
Yeah.
And I think if you pushed it back, it's also allowed, it might look better. It just looks out of balance, and some other way to show that there's a range instead of pushing it all the way to the maximum of the range.
I agree. Pushing it back halfway. And I like your idea of converting this traditional looking building here. I don't know who photoshopping these, but to just change it to a white box instead.
If I may, I want to respectfully disagree on a couple of points. One is that one of the design reasons to bring the new building all the way forward is that you're creating a space with the face of the two buildings. You're creating a pedestrian space that you would not otherwise. If you bring it part way forward, then you've got this sort of eddy space, and you haven't created both the streetscape and a little plaza. That's just a design question. I think actually the detail on the existing building helps to differentiate and identify it as existing, as opposed to we've got an amorphous form for something new. So, I mean, half of one, sixth of.
Ms. Ford?
You're begging, I'm agreeing here that there's too much of a discrepancy in the language between these two diagrams, that, you know, it's, you know, it doesn't really matter in the end, but the perception is historic building when you see something like that, and it's. Yeah, right.
Ugly green.
You know, if you want to show a strip mall,
Yeah, right.
that's fine. That would actually demonstrate exactly what we're trying to get
There
at
you
here.
go.
There you go.
Let me see what we can do with, if we can turn it into a plain white box with corners, we'll do that. This came from somewhere else, and our ability to modify it may be limited, so we'll do the best we can.
It's too bad we don't,
Well, we've got lots of resources.
we have at least 2 architects on the board.
But
Probably do this in a heartbeat, yeah.
that's partly why we don't like them.
Did I see a hand over there, Ms. Brestrup?
Well, I was just going to say that I think one thing that's a little confusing about these images is that they all come up to the front setback line instead of having them arranged, like some of them coming to the maximum setback line, some come to the front, So it looks like everything needs to come right up to the front.
Yeah,
You just glance at this, and I don't know what we can do about that, but
Yeah,
I think
every
it's
single one.
hard to understand because of that.
Ms. Ford?
Well, I also just want, but what I keep looking at these and and I'm trained to read these kinds of drawings, and what I keep seeing is that those 2 dotted lines are representing height and not something in plan. Because of the way, there's the shape of the building and the way it's brought up, it looks like it's a height thing and not a plan thing.
But
You can try and alternate, for instance, in first illustration, we can pull it back halfway. And then in the third illustration, we can pull it back halfway, so that there's
Just you need to play with, yeah, exactly,
so that people get to see that there's that this is a distance.
so you can read it. Yep.
Mr. Schreiber? Microphone.
I hate,
Here we go.
I hate to be, keep on this, but actually the buildings, the existing buildings that are shown are not non-conforming, they're actually conforming. Because in the first case, the first case, it actually comes to the setback line,
If I may, they're not non-conforming in terms of the new rules we're creating for front setbacks. The presumption is that they're non-conforming in some other way.
I see, okay.
However, it's non-conforming, and the range of non-conformity is so broad that they can't capture it all in an image. The presumption is, here is a non-conforming building. Now, how do we change it? How are we allowed to change it? How are we regulating the way in which it changes?
All right. Well, if we can't get the drawings changed for the article, I think we're going to have to present some other pictures when we present the article to give some idea of what we're trying to get at here. And frankly, it would be very helpful if we're going to put diagrams into the zoning bylaw, which these are proposed to become part of our bylaw. These are confusing. And I'm not entirely convinced that it makes things clearer for applicants about what they're supposed to do.
Can I ask a quick question? A question. Would a diagram that was just on one, 2-dimensional rather than trying to show the height of the building masses be easier to, plan view? Would that be easier? You're showing the building squares, existing and proposed, moving up to or into a described setback area, but do we need the 3rd dimension?
We don't. I agree with you. That just confuses things.
I think that in 2 dimensions, it's harder to understand additions versus subtract. It's easier for people who are non-zoning control zoners now. I'm sorry, when we all become zoners. But for people who don't have this odd training or don't look at the world in this way, 3 dimensions is a lot easier to understand.
I don't agree with you. I don't agree with you at all. 2 dimensions is simpler than 3 dimensions.
Someone wants to present us with 2-dimensional drawings that would do the same thing.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a comment on this.
Sure, come on up.
My name is Ted Parker. Ted Parker, I live in Amherst, I live on Woodlot Road. One of the reasons that these diagrams are confusing is because in the first one, the back setback line, where it intersects the green forward building and the existing building, it should be the line should disappear.
The intent is that these are
Transparent buildings, I get that, but it's, but I do this for a living every day, so I was able to interpret it. But I think for a layperson, if those lines were disappearing, or they have them disappear behind the green building but extend beyond the green building, it would become graphically clear to almost anybody that the line was on the ground rather than floating in the air.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
It's pretty. And it applies to all of them, in fact. I think it would make clear that where they were.
That would be a relatively simple.
I'd like to point out that the warrant gets signed on Monday.
Mr. O'Keefe,
This might be a radical notion,
you
but
can stay here. We'll get to you in just a minute.
I would suggest that the diagrams don't really add very much to the article at all, and the words are pretty clear. Like the first one says, any addition in front of an existing building shall be placed within the front setback area established by the minimum and maximum front setback. Done.
I agree with you. Actually, if we take the pictures out, that makes it a whole lot easier. And if we want to present pictures when we present the article to give some idea,
Yes.
it does, and I think it takes the confusion right out of it. Is anyone opposed to taking the pictures out, besides Mr. Crowner? I don't hear anyone, so let's take the pictures out, and we'll just go with the text. All right, moving right along to the next item on our agenda. We have with us here Mr. Ted Parker of Tofino Associates. He's here to talk to us about his request to release lots and completion of subdivision roadways and infrastructure in the Amherst Hills subdivisions, SUB 89-13. Take it away, Mr. Parker.
Thank you for listening to me. I appeared before you last year. Everybody has a copy of this map. I always forget how efficient everything is here, and I made copies to bring with me. Yes. I made another document, make it easy to understand. It's just a spreadsheet with a summary of the lot statuses, also color key, so that new people are going to ask me about counts. It's easy to look at totals and columns rather than add them up in your head.
Thank you.
Oops.
Yeah.
So we have your letter here that explains what you're doing, and if you could just give us a quick summary, please.
I can. If you look at the map very quickly, we're running out of lots to sell. We were asked to supply a guarantee last year for the completion of the subdivision, and I dutifully went away and began to negotiate with the lender to supply that guarantee, and then it became clear to us that it made more sense, rather than just securing the money, to just complete more of the subdivision. And then when I thought about it a little more, it became clear to me that completing Concord Way, now, is it clear to everybody that the black parts, if you look at the roadways, right now we're paved up where the black sections end. So Concord Way stops at lot 56, if you can squint and read the little numbers. And Linden Ridge stops in front of lot 57.
Yep.
And which, the way it was phased, it created two dead-end roads, both suboptimal for lots of reasons. By completing Concord and connecting it to Linden Ridge, and by completing Linden Ridge till its intersection with Concord, we're essentially creating a fully functional subdivision that there's through traffic allowed, better emergency vehicle access, turnaround, no need for people to get to the end and do a K-turn to turn around. And for a lot of reasons, it just made sense. It also, from our marketing perspective, it brought the pink lots, it brought 20 additional lots onto the market, which we're feeling like cautiously optimistic that things are taking a turn for the better. And as it is now, the only lots that we can sell are the ones that are released and unsold, which are the crosshatched lots, 65 and 29 and 42. What we're proposing is to complete the construction on Concord and Linden Ridge up to the intersection. Everything, sidewalk, base coat of paving, berm, all the underground utilities, leave leave the finished coat of paving off as we have elsewhere, supply a three-party agreement between us, the town, and the bank to ensure that the final coat of paving and other miscellaneous work will be complete. And then in exchange, then we would request that all the lots that are paved and ready to go would be released. So the only lots that wouldn't be released are the lots that are in black. Those lots have an approximate value, conservative value of just north of $1 million. So we feel like that's a pretty big financial incentive for us to complete the subdivision. And in addition to that, we'll also supply a three-party agreement sufficient to cover the cost of the final coat of paving on all the areas that we currently have paved, the as-built drawings, et cetera, et cetera. I've asked the town engineer to modify the original cost estimate for the work. He prepared an original cost estimate last year for all the work. I asked him to prepare a revised cost estimate to cover the work that we want to submit as financial guarantee for. That make sense?
It does. Does anybody have any questions? And this seems like a very reasonable solution to me. I've read your description, I've looked at the lots, and I think you're asking us to agree in principle that we would approve
Until
this.
I have actual numbers from Jason, I can't go to the bank and get a number. I have to submit to town council a three-party agreement for approval. We, unlike last year where everybody was already wearing shorts and the paving plant was already open, this year nobody is wearing shorts and the paving plant hasn't opened. I was hoping to be done by April and have the paving down. It doesn't look like that's going to happen until the first week of May, so the timing works out fine. I'll work with Jason to, I took a stab at modifying his spreadsheet with some numbers and gave it to him to work with. He said he would get back to me. When I have that, I'll come back. So yes, the answer is yes, I'm asking for an agreement in principle, and with another probably 3 or 4 weeks to get final approval.
Does anybody on the board have any objection to this? It seems much more reasonable to me. I like that you're finishing your loop. I mean, that alone to allow access for emergency vehicles is fantastic.
It just appeared to me as the best,
Yep.
best solution to the problem.
I see nodding heads. I don't see any change. So we're in consensus that this is a good plan, that
Great.
we'll go for it if you bring it back.
With your, I don't know if this is, I want to mention it, that I think I'd like to start marketing the lots. Obviously, we are still bound by covenant, which prohibits us from the sale of the lots until we have the release from the covenant. But I hope won't be considered presumptuous to get the marketing process going.
You'd have to consult your counsel about that. so.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming in. We appreciate the, advisory visits like this are very helpful.
My pleasure.
Okay.
Free design advice on our other articles.
And we got some free design advice, which was very helpful. Thank you for your assistance with our zoning article. Next up, our perennial favorite master plan implementation committee.
Has he broken yet?
I think, does anyone have anything new to say on this? If not, we'll move to the next item. Anyone? Ms. Brestrup?
No one wants to volunteer to be the representative. Shall I put this back on your agenda at some point in the future?
I'll leave that to your discretion. At this point, though, I'm not sensing any interest in pursuing it, other than theoretical.
Has the committee been populated? I mean, does it exist?
No, I think Mr. Tucker suggested that you might be the first to take the plunge and then others would follow.
Feel like plunging?
All right, moving right along. Not to say that it's not important, but we just don't have anything new. Any topics not reasonably anticipated?
Not under old business.
Under new business, we have a letter from the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation dated March 2013 with an enclosed technical bulletin titled Terra Firma Number 2, Caring for Mature Trees. This is a rather detailed explanation of how communities should be managing their existing large trees for the most part. It's an interesting read, and I highly recommend it to anyone. It's available online through Department of Conservation and Recreation, and it actually has a picture of the Sunderland sycamore in the pamphlet, which is on the which is a 112 feet tall, and it has a circumference of nearly 25 feet. It is a Massachusetts champion tree, and it's in the very next town. So, did anyone have any comments or suggestions, questions about?
Is that the one on the first page?
What's that?
Is that the one, no?
Nope, it's on, unfortunately, in Massachusetts, we don't number our pages, but if you count, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's on the 6th page.
Some of these are numbered.
They are?
Number 10 is numbered. We don't have street signs on the cross streets, and we don't have numbers on them.
Right. Oh, I see, you can, there is a,
4 before page.
yep, 9 and 10 are labeled. All right. So read it, it's worth it. We have tree considerations come before us from time to time. It's good to have the information. I'd recommend maybe even saving it. All right. Planning board schedule is next, and we'll try and get through this fairly quickly. Our next meeting is April 17th. We're scheduled for 2 public hearings at that meeting. We have the fraternity one and the form base that we just discussed, or rather the location of buildings article. After that, May 6th is town meeting.
Don't we have a meeting on May 1st?
We should have a meeting on May 1st.
I got it in my book marked.
Okay, so let's, our calendar sheet should have a meeting shown in there on May 1st. And do we have let's talk about our agendas coming up, Ms. Brestrup.
So for the 17th, you do have the 2 zoning amendments, and then you have a scenic roads public hearing with the tree warden on removal of shade trees and stone wall disturbance at Leverett Road. And some people went on a site visit a few weeks ago about that. If anyone would like to visit the site with me at a separate time, I'd be happy to arrange that. And then there's, you have 2 other site plan review applications that are on the docket for that night, but one of them I think is going to be, the applicant is going to request a continuance, and that would be Mr. Laverdier on 417 West Street. There are some complications with regard to frontage on that property, and he's planning to address those, and some of the zoning amendments that are coming before the town meeting this spring may affect his plans as well. So he would like to continue that hearing, and he'll be submitting a letter to you to that effect. And then you have the Unitarian Universalist Society that is coming before you with an addition and site improvements that night. Then you also have a couple of minor things. There will also be, we're going to put a warrant review on the schedule for that night, so you'll be able to look at the town meeting warrant. No, you don't want to do that?
How can we possibly have time for that?
Well, as I said, you probably won't need to hear anything about Mr. Laverdier's project. He's going to bring a letter asking for continuance, and he won't plan to give any testimony because the plans he submitted are problematic with regard to frontage.
The warrant review,
Warrant review would be just to run through the warrant and note if there are other warrant articles besides zoning articles that you may wish to speak about, and it may be that there aren't any. And then you would need to choose movers and speakers, because the list of movers and speakers is due shortly after that.
okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. O'Keefe.
Could I suggest for the warrant review, what we've done in the past is kind of had almost literally a rundown of the warrant and going through article by article and sort of having someone explain it to us and asking random questions about it, and that can be kind of time consuming. Maybe it would be better if we had in advance all received the warrant and we could look at it ourselves and decide what we want to ask questions about, rather than having to have the whole thing explained to us, which could take up a fairly significant chunk of the meeting.
So who would be doing the explaining? You?
I don't need to do any explaining. If Mr. Tucker is here, he may want to do some explaining, but if you had the warrant ahead of time, which you would have in your packet for the 17th, you could just say that you prefer not to have any explaining done to you.
So,
It would be after holding 3 public hearings.
right. So I guess I'm not suggesting that wouldn't benefit from the explaining. I'm just saying from an expediency point of view, if you change the format so it was more us coming forward with things that we had questions about, rather than needing to have it all explained to us, it might be more efficient.
I agree. So that leaves us with May 1st, which is do we have any public hearings scheduled for that?
There aren't any public hearings scheduled, but I believe that the Housing and Sheltering Committee may want to come and give you a presentation about the housing production plan. Maybe Ms. Kruger knows a little more about that than I do, but that was a suggestion that they could come on May 1st.
Please.
At their last meeting, they talked about wanting to come and present the plan, because they are hoping to have the plan adopted or approved by this body and by the select board, but they didn't have a date. And I think Mr. Malloy, who's the staff person for that committee, said that you had some ideas about when it would fit best on the planning board agenda. I was hoping it would be before town meeting at least, so that we could benefit from the data and some of that information, because I thought it was relevant to some of our presentations and preparation of presentations.
I think that sounds reasonable. See nodding heads. Let's put that on for sure.
We don't have anything for the 15th. There is something that's kind of floating out there, and I'm not sure what's going to happen with it. The town received a request to release the property on Henry Street and Market Hill Road from Chapter 61, and Town Council has come back with some comments, and so we're waiting to hear again from the applicant about what she's proposing. So you may need to have that on your agenda on either the 1st or the 15th.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Crowner.
Can we also plan to meet, as we have done often in the past, to schedule meetings for town meeting dates in case we have last minute things to discuss? And so maybe that could happen at that.
I'm not opposed to that. That's been very useful in the past. Before we, while we're on the subject of items to schedule, we have a request from Cinda Jones to prepare for Springtown meeting a OSCD Natural Resource Protection Zoning article. I think that it was explained to Ms. Jones that there just simply isn't time to prepare something of that scope for Springtown meeting. Mr. Crowner?
Yeah, the zoning subcommittee briefly discussed this as well. The proposal that is suggested there is to make OSCD a by right thing rather than a special permit. And so, yeah, the zoning subcommittee said there's just no way we can do that now. But in general, what I think she's getting at is finding some way to make transfer of development rights work in Amherst. And so she's promoted TDR. She suggested the other alternate version of TDR. This is another suggestion that she's making, and they're all ways of trying to find ways of pushing density from one area to another in different ways. And so I think it's something that maybe we could explore if we're not able to turn back to TDR. This might be another way of doing it, but obviously not now.
I agree in principle with you. I think, the idea we've talked about many times in the master plan says that we should try to concentrate development, preserve open space, and something like allowing cluster developments by right certainly seems to, in principle, to fit into that scheme. Unfortunately, we're full up right now, but maybe we could take it up after town meeting. I think that's about it for the calendar, except that I want to mention that the town warrant review, which is where they explain the warrant articles to town meeting members, is April 23rd. There's also a bus tour for town meeting members that'll be visiting sites that are affected by items on the warrant. And there are also precinct meetings for each of the voting precincts within Amherst, where the town meeting members from that precinct get together and discuss the articles. And there's been requests for members of the planning board to attend as many of these as possible. So if you feel up to it, track down your local precinct meeting. It's maybe a little hard to do. I don't know how you find out when or where it is, but surely it's on the town website. So anything anyone can do, please do. Anything else? Topics not reasonably anticipated, new business?
I don't have any topics.
How about A&Rs? Let's see, upcoming ZBA applications.
I don't have any information on upcoming ZBA applications.
We've already heard about upcoming site plan review and subdivision applications. We did that already. And that brings us to subcommittee reports at 8:30. PVPC.
No report. We meet next week.
Let's see. Community Preservation Act Committee is Sandy, she's not here. Agricultural Commission hasn't met since our last meeting. Transportation Plan Task Force.
Go ahead.
I just
Breaststroke.
wanted to say that I have reached out to all the members of the Transportation Plan Task Force who served last year at the request of John Musanti, and all but one of them have responded that they are interested in continuing, and so it's my understanding that Mr. Musanti will be reappointing those members and that things will get started quickly, I hope.
Mr. Rosnoy is hopeful of progress. Redevelopment Authority.
No report, no meeting.
Design Review Board.
No report.
Housing and Sheltering.
Yes, in part, I think what Ms. Brestrup said about that representatives from that committee coming to you with the housing production plan soon, and hopefully May 1st is part of the report. They met last week, and there were a number of people there to speak to the Housing and Sheltering Committee about the Eco Village set of issues, including wanting some conversation about the petition article, which you may or may not, I know we got sent them about, there's a petition article to use the powers of eminent domain to take that building. The Housing and Sheltering Committee did not take a position on that article, but going to backtrack. I had hoped Ms. Anderson would be here to let you know what happened at the Community Preservation Act Committee, because two members from the Housing Authority, myself and Laura Quinn, and a representative from Family Outreach of Amherst went to the Community Preservation Act Committee last week and asked for $15,000 for an emergency renters fund to help people who are displaced from housing in Amherst who need help with last month's rent or security deposit or finder's fees. And the Community Preservation Act Committee unanimously supported that proposal as one of their recommendations. And I think it's the first time they accepted an emergency proposal after their official deadline. And it was a very supportive move, and that will be now included in the list of CPA articles that you'll see brought to town meeting, and then town meeting will decide. The intent is to raise $50,000, adding to that $15,000 to assist people at Echo Village and others in the future who are having a hard time relocating within Amherst because of the extra expenses.
Thank you, Ms. Kruger.
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
Question.
Mr. Rosnoy.
A question from Ms. Kruger. Was there any decision made about someone from that group speaking about either or both of the housing plans at town meeting, making a report, as we discussed at our last meeting?
Oh. No, because it didn't come up, and I perhaps should have remembered to bring it up. So I forget when their next meeting is, but I could certainly even email the chair and ask that they, if they're going to do that, or if they're planning, that it might be a good idea to do that. Is that what you had in mind?
Something like
Yeah.
that.
Since I'm not a member, I'm their liaison, I can actually just write to members. So I would do that if you thought that would be helpful.
Thanks.
Thank you. Finally, the Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods Working Group. That was Ms. Anderson as well. And they have completed their draft and of the general bylaw. There's been much comment about it, and it'll be coming before town meeting for a vote. The report of the chair, I don't have one. Report of staff? We're adjourned.